Africa now wants reparations for slavery. Delegates at a summit in Ghana reignited debate on the irreparable harm the transatlantic slave trade inflicted on Africa and Africans, saying they'll push for redress. A key outcome of the summit was the setting up of a Global Reparations Fund. A report by a special UN forum appears to back Africa in this quest, saying reparation is a cornerstone of justice in the 21st century. So this week on the program, we ask, just how practical is the idea of reparations for slavery? And should it be Africa's preoccupation? I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Well, let's now bring in our panel of experts. Joining in from Pretoria, 𝐓𝐚𝐥𝐤, a professor in the African Department of Political Sciences, University of South Africa. In Berlin, Dr. Hannah Hankins-Evans, attorney and lecturer in European Union law and international economic law. And in Washington, D.C., Nkechi Taifa, executive director, Reparation Education Project, all joining via Zoom. A warm welcome to you all, and thank you for joining in this discussion. I want to get your views first, all of you, and let me start off with you, Nkechi. Delegates at a reparation summit in Ghana have agreed to establish a global reparation fund to push for compensation for the millions of Africans enslaved centuries ago during the transatlantic slave trade. Why is there a growing demand for slave reparations?
Well, there is a growing demand because it has never been paid. It's the debt that is owed that is still outstanding after all of these hundreds of years. But I might caution, it's not just for slavery and the enslavement era, but it's living legacies that last down through today. The enslavement, the extraction of over 300 million Africans from the continent, the underdevelopment of the continent, the colonialism, the neo-colonialism, and the like. So my understanding that this reparations fund is to allow Africa to further develop its reparation strategy, do it in concert with what's happening in the Caribbean and in the other parts of the diaspora, and come up with a body of experts and a joint legal strategy for reparatory justice. Germany paid reparations to the Jews. The United States paid reparations to the Japanese Americans for their unjust incarceration during World War II. There were feeble efforts made pursuant to the Native American Claims Act with respect to indigenous populations. But even more atrocious, reparations were in fact paid after the end of various enslavement eras. They just weren't paid to Black folk. They were paid to the former enslavers. It was paid in the United States to the former white enslavers after the 13th Amendment. They were paid in Haiti paid reparations, was forced to pay reparations to France after winning its freedom, and those reparations continued all the way down through 1947. Britain, just the last one, Britain paid reparations after its abolition of slavery, not to the formerly enslaved, but to the former white enslavers. And those reparation payments continued all the way down through 2015. It is a debt that is owed, that's never been paid, and it's come due.
Hannah, let me get your view. Have Africa and African descendants been left out?
Yes, certainly. I agree with what Nkechi has said in that regard, that the historic wrong has never been undone. And of course, there are legal barriers that hinder the effective fulfillment and payment of reparations that are also being brought forward these days and since the beginning of time, since this demand was being vocalized. However, law was also a key factor in the subjugation and in the oppression of enslaved Africans and of people that were colonized in Africa. So we need to understand that this, colonialism in that sense has not ended. My research revolves around post-colonial theories, and you can see in the structure of this world today that certain dependencies are still upheld particularly in our economic system as we know today. And many of our forefathers and liberators, such as 𝐓𝐚𝐥𝐤, for example, he saw the international trade and investment laws as central to the liberation and to a just world order.
Right. Professor 𝐓𝐚𝐥𝐤, your take.
I heard a talk about the transatlantic slave trade. To the best of my memory, the Atlantic Ocean never enslaved anybody. It was the British and the Americans. So the first port of call is to call a spade a spade. There was never a transatlantic slave trade. What was there was the British or the European and American slave trade. We are not seeing the black race being involved in a genuine discussion for reparations the way that Jews were reparated. And there are a lot of examples that my co-panelists have mentioned. And the question is that, why is it that the black race is not taken seriously when it comes to the issue of reparations? You ask, why is it that the Germans are not serious about reparating the Herero and the Nama people in Namibia? The answer is that the black race is not part of the human race. We don't have human rights. Therefore, we are not viewed as human. Therefore, when they talk about reparating humans, they are talking about reparating Germans and Jews, because those they qualify to be classified as humans. Right. We are not humans as the black race. And this is why we are talking about a history of being enslaved, being colonized, and even today slavery continues, but in a different format. So my take is that until the black race joins the realms of the human, reparations will continue to be a token, or at worst a farce.
Right. Hannah, let me rope you in here. Africa is still suffering, but there's still no agreement about all the harm that has been done on the continent. Therefore, reparations are yet to come. Is that your take as well?
Yes, and I agree with my my learned friends here on the points that have been made. I do believe that our world is structured around anti-blackness, and blackness was placed at the bottom of a hierarchy in who was granted or who was seen as human. And there is a history of dehumanization of Black people that started with the enslavement of Africans and the trafficking of these people and treatment as property. And it was justified by coining it as a kind of Christian duty of white people to save the savages. And it's not even hidden in the history books. If we look for it, it's very explicitly referred to that international law is the law of white men, and it is their right. It was coined as a right for them to invade and to conquer and to exploit people and deprive them of their humanity. And it was done particularly to Black people. So the continuance of this dehumanization and this anti-Blackness is something we see today. We see it on the borders of Europe, where thousands of Africans are drowning. We see it in the continuance of disenfranchisement in the Americas of Black people that cannot partake and have not yet seen any reparatory justice in that regard, be it monetary, but also in restoring humanity. Because until now, it is even sometimes denied that this is a construct, that the racialization of Black people actually occurred. It is still pretended, or proxies are used for race, where actually race is a key factor in the decision why something is not granted to a group of people. And we can see this across the diaspora and on the continent itself. For example, Germany and Namibia, if we look at the relationship of both states, Namibia is one of the #1 recipients of development aid. So why is that? So we want to keep them at the periphery. You know, there is a certain a strong will behind maintaining the world order as it is. So this is also informing the resistance against paying reparations. And if we look to South Africa, for example, even in a Black-led state, we have not seen the justice that, you know, would be due to Black people. And there is laws in place, like the Black Economic Empowerment, you know, laws and legislations that is supposed to, you know, kind of economically also undo historical wrongs, and it's not necessarily, it has not really bridged the immense inequality that we see in that country. Now imagine looking to the United States, for example, without such a government in place that is, you know, working in your interests. I think there is a long way to go, and of course we all are aware that it also will take political channels, that it will be a political outcome, because we do lack power, and that is exactly the outcome of what, you know, the historical colonialism and neocolonialism is meant to do, to keep certain power imbalances in place.
All right. So 𝐀𝐟𝐫𝐤, let's go back to the reparations summit that happened in Ghana and what the continent is requesting. Who is expected to put money into such a fund? What is the end game here?
This fund that came, that is to come out of this conference is not reparations. The fund is to help organize the instrumentalities that will help to strategize and to bring about of the claim or the demand for reparation. But that's not a reparations fund. That's my understanding. It's more for the mobilization to be able to organize around the issue. So I can't speak to exactly who's putting the monies into it, but my understanding is that it is to go towards establishing a continent-wide strategy for Africa in concert or in collaboration with what's going on with respect to this, the countries in the Caribbean and the diaspora as a whole. Africa is coming a bit late to this conversation, if I may say. I know 𝐀𝐟𝐫𝐚, the Community of Caribbean Nations, back around in 2013, established its 10-point program. As I said, there have been efforts in the diaspora in the United States. But right now, what Africa is looking at is not just the, and thank you, my brother, I will never use transatlantic slave trade again, because you're absolutely correct. The Atlantic Ocean did not do anything. It was people that did. But not just looking at that aspect, but at the destabilization of the continent of the Africa as a whole, as a result of millions of people being forcibly extracted from there, and just what the results of that was on the continent itself, and the effects of colonialism and neocolonialism.
Anna, I want to find out from the past experience and looking at the German position, for instance, or the Japanese, who is expected to put money into this fund for Africa?
Well, of course, you know, there have been several demands addressed to the German government, to Germany as the, you know, as the one inherited, that has also inherited the wealth and the position today. And of course, that is not everyone that was involved. We have corporations involved, we have universities involved. There's many institutions that, you know, when we take a closer look at the history of the enslavement and colonialism, there were many more beneficiaries in that regard, you know, and we can see it in the accumulation of wealth in the global north. So, of course, the first addressee is the German government, and they have already denied at least also taking responsibility. So that's something, you know, that where activists are still pushing, because it is said that during the time of these cruelties, it was not prohibited. But we have, as has been pointed out by the other speakers, we have seen in the history that it was possible. Reparations were paid. It was, however, not to the ones that, you know, suffered harm, and also not to Black people in specifically, but maybe to other victims of German cruelty.
So Hannah, you know, some advisors have talked about the reparations as saying that compensations are based on moral and legal rights and the dignity of the people. What exactly does this mean?
Legally speaking, I've referred already to what is being brought against a claim for reparations. It's the legality. But with regards to the legality, we need to understand that legality is a construct. What was legal yesterday can be illegal tomorrow. So, you know, this can change. And we need to understand how law enabled the oppression overall, you know, that it is not a fact, it's not a science in that sense that it can you know, that this was the status quo. No, it was constructed in a way, and you made slavery was illegal. The enslavement of people was illegal. There was an exception made for Black people, you know, and it was upheld in courts by arguing that they lack humanity in comparison to, let's say, white people or people that were non-Black. But this is a construct. I mean, today we all agree that we all carry the same core of humanity, and this is a false narrative. However, it has not been undone with regards to the history, and it has not done with regards to the still economic effects that, and you know, effects that can be still felt. And this is on the one hand, of course, of an economic nature, but it's also, as for example, James Baldwin has said, what it does to your mind, what it does to you, how you feel about yourself. You know, it's really the dehumanization that we need to view as a much broader impact on our community, that had a much broader impact. And so it's also part, in my opinion, of reparation. Part of it is restoring humanity and really acknowledging that, you know, from a moral standpoint, something was done wrong and needs to be done right. It needs to be repaired.
Right. Dr. 𝐓𝐚𝐥𝐤, I want to look at that acknowledgement that Hannah is talking about, because we have seen some of the European monarchs, Britain's King Charles III, the Belgium's King Philippe, they have both stopped short of apologizing for colonial era atrocities. Why do you think that is? And how would you respond to an argument that reparations can be seen as a form of acknowledgement and an attempt to rectify past wrongs?
They did not stop short of acknowledging. They refused to acknowledge. You see, it's there for everybody to see. There are two victims of Imperial Germans, the Herero Nama in Namibia and the Jews. Today, look at the extent to which Germany is going to protect Jewish interest, to protect Israeli interest, and they refuse even to acknowledge that there was a genocide in Namibia, yet they drove a whole nation of people into the desert. There are photographs and there's everything, but they say, we will not admit that we did it. We will not admit that it is a genocide. In fact, we will not pay reparations. What we can do is to build a road. There is just one reason why the Germans refuse to treat African victims of their past the way that they treat Jewish victims of their past. It's because Africans are not people. Africans are not humans to the Germans. But let me rewind a bit and go back to how I conceptualize reparations. Reparation is not only what I lost, but it is, in addition to what I lost, what you also gained. So Euro-North America was developed by Africa. So it's not what Africa lost, human resources, gold, diamond, timber. It's also those buildings in New York, those buildings in France, those buildings in the United Kingdom that were built by us, Africans. So reparations is much broader than giving us money, which, by the way, is 0.0001% of what they accumulated from denying us our humanity.
All right. On that note, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we will continue our discussion on Africa's push for slavery reparations. To stay with us. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Let's continue with our discussion. Still with me, Professor Evaristo Banyera, Dr. Anna Hankins-Evans, and Nikichi Taifa. Well, Nikichi, you know, activists have said reparations should go beyond direct financial payment to also include issues like development aid, the return of colonized resources, and systemic corrections of oppressive policies and laws. What is your thought on that?
Oh, I agree 100%. I always say that the harms from the enslavement era and its living legacies were multifaceted. Thus, the remedies must be multifaceted as well. A reparations settlement can be fashioned in as many ways as necessary to, to deal with the all of the harms and the injuries from the enslavement era. And again, it's living legacies that last down through to today. There's also the issue of the return of artifacts and things like that that have been snatched from the continent and taken to other lands. There is the change in policies and procedures. There's so many ways, truthful textbooks that development resources that a reparations settlement can be accomplished. The right to self-determination, issues in the United States in terms of making a multiracial democracy real for those who want that, repatriation resources for those who want to return to the continent of Africa or to some other place. So there are many ways in which a reparations settlement can in fact be fashioned, and financial direct cash payments is only one very, very, very small part of the whole.
Right. Professor 𝐓𝐚𝐥𝐤, should it go beyond the financial atonement?
It should go beyond money. And for me, the first thing is acknowledgement of the harm that was done. King Charles was in Kenya recently. We thought that he was going to apologize, especially for the brutal way in which his ancestors put down the Mau Mau rebellion. But guess what? Instead of apologizing, he looked for a Kenyan man who fought on the side of the British. This gentleman threw away the 3 medals which Imperial Britain had given to him in fear of the Mau Mau rebellion. King Charles went and gave him back replica medals. How about that for reparation and acknowledgement? So these people, Beatrice, are unrepentant. These people don't respect us. This is the truth. Otherwise, what explains the behavior by King Charles? They went to the Barbados there. They were asked to apologize in Barbados. They did not. They never acknowledge. They never admit. All they do is to sugarcoat it and say, oh, it's a very difficult past between our two nations. No, it's not a difficult past. The biggest crime that the slave traders perpetrated was to cut the black race from their roots. So, you are now called a black American. You are neither black nor American. You are black African, you are black American. Who are you exactly? For me, that is the greatest atrocity, to steal somebody's identity and then you render them a colonial project.
So Professor 𝐓𝐚𝐥𝐤, how would you want Africa to approach this issue in terms of getting an apology or getting reparations from slave traders?
We have got the African Union, we have got the various regional blocs such as SADC. France still operates the Francophrique, the United Kingdom still operates the Commonwealth. The bodies are there. For example, just one example, the king can actually draft a public apology to everybody. Once they've apologized and acknowledged, then we can begin to talk and move forward. As long as they refuse that they were brutal to us, that they experimented on us, that they did all sorts of inhumane things on us, we cannot move forward and talk about reparations in earnest. So an admission is the first thing. And by the way, we may not even want their money. We may even end by an acknowledgement. Then we move forward. But as long as an acknowledgement is there, the money is not that meaningful.
Hannah, in this process, though, how will we ensure that the benefits are there for the masses, for the countries that were affected?
The conference is a first step. That this is a good platform to mobilize people, to get on board and to discuss. And of course, it will take also expert committees to establish, the modus operandi of payments of such reparations, or for example, the establishment of a fund. So these discussions are being held by the people in question, but it's always used also by Western state as an excuse of not paying reparations. And that's why I think it is a time for these discussions, but it is a time also to first establish that there is a right, to reparations, and there is a right to undo historical injustices.
All right, so I want to get your winding up comments, and let me start off with you, 𝐸𝐚𝐥𝐤. what alternative solutions, or are there alternative solutions that can be used to address the historical injustices and disparities resulting from the slave trade?
Well, I think the solution is the payment of reparations. The solution is for Africa, the diaspora, the Caribbean, and the like to be on one page with respect to what the harms were, what the injuries were in each of our respective jurisdictions, and come up with a joint strategy for reparations, not just globally, but specific to the specific places where we were each dropped off at, or the continent, itself. The many models that are out there, it's not a blank slate. Reparations have in fact been paid throughout the centuries. We simply need to look at those models and ensure that we are looked at, as my colleague said, as human beings with a right, as well as a right as every other people have had to repair, to amends, to healing, and for justice.
Professor Benyera?
All we are demanding for Beatrice is the right to rights. We also want to be heard like equal human beings. In Africa, through Ubuntu, we believe that humanity is indivisible. We are one humanity, we are one human race. We need to know our history, we need to know our heritage. We cannot be Jamaicans, Barbadosians, and so on and so on. Where in Africa, where we're taken from, there is need for a fund to fund these, not researches, but because the data is there, the information is there. Those with this information, just like they brought out the artifacts, they must just bring out this information and say people that were resettled in this part of the Caribbean were taken from what was called the Gulf of Guinea. These people came from what was called the Slave Coast, now Nigeria. So the first thing is for us to regain our humanity, to regain our history, to regain our roots. After that, we can talk about everything else, because without being full humans, without being accepted into the realms of humanity, we will continue to be experimented upon. We will continue to die on the high seas while we are trying to go to the global north instead of staying at home, because the home was rendered inhospitable. The home is being rendered ungovernable. Therefore, we are going there to the first world where things are supposedly good and nice.
All right. Anna, you have the final thoughts.
I do agree with everything that has been said. Absolutely. And money needs to be paid. That's the first step, I do believe that this world is inherently anti-Black and was structured around this. There needs to be done more than that. There needs to be a restoration of humanity, but also we need to look at certain structures. Like, why is it that Black people are among the most vulnerable in the world? Wherever we look, in whatever society we look, we see the reality of African Americans, Black Americans who do not have the freedom of movement, because it's not economically viable for them to even travel to African countries, and how that hinders them to reconnect with where they were taken. So it needs to be thought a lot broader and more structural than money, but money would be a first step. And I hope that I will live to see that day.
All right, but that's all we have time for on this edition of Talk Africa. A big thank you to our guests, 𝐓𝐚𝐥𝐤, a professor in the African Department of Political Sciences at the University of South Africa, Dr. Anna Hankins-Evans, attorney and lecturer in European Union law and international economic law, and Nkechi Taifa, executive director, Reparation Education Project. Remember, you can be a part of this conversation through our social media platforms on Facebook and X, formerly known as Twitter. And you can also watch this and other editions of Talk Africa on our YouTube playlist. Do join us again next week for more Talk Africa. For me, Beatrice Marshall, and the team here in Nairobi. Until next time, it's goodbye.